In San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, Bitcoin tumbled over the weekend after a South Korean crypto exchange, CoinRail, said it has been hacked. We will track the breach and talk about whether the market can recover after a rough start to 2018. Plus, the FCC has successfully rolled back net neutrality, with the old rules officially expiring. But could those opposing the decision get the upper hand? We will speak to FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. And London Tech Week is underway. We will hear from Mayor Sadiq Khan on how the city is shaking off headwinds like Brexit to lure talent and innovation. First, to our top story. A crypto exchange hack in South Korea pours fuel on the fire that is the Bitcoin slump. There's been a $42 billion sell-off in cryptocurrencies since Friday, with Bitcoin itself down more than 50% in the last year. The South Korean exchange CoinRail says some of its digital currency appears to have been stolen by hackers, but wouldn't disclose how much. The exchange did say 2/3 of the stolen assets have been frozen or collected, and investigators are following up on the rest. This isn't the first time we've seen this type of hack. The Japanese exchange CoinCheck was hit in late January with a heist worth $500 million. When will these security risks let up? Joining us now from Washington, Bloomberg's Jordan Robertson, who covers all things cybersecurity, and also with us from New York. We have our Bloomberg executive editor and host of What'd You Miss, Joe Weisenthal. Jordan, I want to start with you. What exactly happened in this CoinRail hack as far as we know it?
Thanks, Emily. As far as we know, hackers compromised the website for a small South Korean cryptocurrency exchange called CoinRail. CoinRail is not a name that would be on the tips of most people's tongues. It barely ranks in the top 100 of global cryptocurrency exchanges. But what happened there has a lot of resonance for anybody investing in this market, and it's part of the reason you're seeing, there was a big sell-off this weekend in terms of, billions of dollars of cryptocurrency stock or value, billions of dollars in value from cryptocurrencies falling. The reason for that is once a piece of digital currency is stolen, you cannot get it back. It's not like money that can be reimbursed by a bank, although some cryptocurrency exchanges have reimbursed victims of hacking attacks. I find it endlessly fascinating that what a cryptocurrency is, it is a number. It is a digital file that you are given, and if you give that to an exchange and that exchange is then hacked, that money is gone for good. So you're seeing a lot of people running away from the market because of that security risk.
I want to put this into context. So take a look at this chart in my GTV library, which shows the slump in cryptocurrencies over the last 6 months. Joe, how much of this is due to this particular hack? Is this due to lingering concern about crackdowns in China and overall pessimism from folks like yourself?
I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. I mean, look, I think the simplest answer is it's the backside of the euphoria that we saw in Q3 and Q4 of 2017, when people were throwing out enormous expectations of where the price was going. It was going parabolic. Everybody was talking about it. Celebrities were talking about it. And the interesting thing is that if you just look from a fundamental standpoint in 2018 and you saw ongoing moves into the space, whether it's legacy financial companies expanding into the space, upstarts getting more institutionalized, people who have their careers in finance jumping into crypto, things look really good, or some of the news looks really good, but it hasn't been enough to sort of stem the tide of what is sort of what happens at the other half of when an asset goes parabolic like this.
On the security issue in particular, Jordan, why are cryptocurrencies so difficult to secure? You would think that they would be less vulnerable to fraud because they are trackable.
You would. Part of the problem is that, as I said earlier, I mean, one of the really difficult parts about handling virtual currencies or digital currencies and protecting them is that it's simply a file. It is simply a number. It's a unique number assigned to a particular individual and the value of their digital currency. So if you think about all the massive data hacks that we've seen and, the terabytes of data flying out of companies as a result of hacks, if you replace those data sets, whether they're emails or whatever, with a Bitcoin that could be worth thousands or millions of dollars. What you get is like the perfect target for these hacking attacks. And when the criminals make off with their bounty, it is literally a file filled with numbers that then become, again, tens of millions of dollars potentially in this case. They're very, very hard to protect because they're a very small, discrete piece of data that once you lose it, it's gone.
And yet there are some big banks experimenting with cryptocurrencies, some more than experimenting with cryptocurrency. Joe, do you see at any point this becoming a legitimate currency that is backed by a global financial system if some of these hiccups and issues are worked out?
It's possible, but something that I think is really important is that the hiccups that you mentioned and that Jordan described are both the vulnerability of cryptocurrencies, but also arguably the selling point. Because if you think about it, what is the case to use a cryptocurrency as opposed to a traditional currency for transactions? It is the implicit promise that nobody can seize it from you. Nobody can tell you who you can spend it with. Nobody can tell you, say, you can't move it from one country to another, circumventing capital controls. These are all of the things that are theoretically what make Bitcoin or make other cryptocurrencies appealing to people. And so the flip side has to be some measure of irreversibility, because you couldn't have a system in which you could have ironclad guarantee that you can do the transaction you want to transact with if there was some third party that could say, no, we're going to reverse that transaction, or you're not allowed to. And so as long as a cryptocurrency is sort of designed for this purpose of censorship-free transactions, there will never be a day, I don't think, where there isn't a risk of hacks and mistakes that result in permanent loss of funds.
Jordan, it's not just about cryptocurrency, it's about the blockchain in general, which so many people are, heralding the future of, not necessarily when it comes to Bitcoin and these particular currencies, but the potential for blockchain technology to revolutionize, the rest of the internet. I mean, do you think that there's more optimism there outside of these, specific markets?
Sure, yeah. The underlying technology here for these digital currencies, the blockchain, it actually has some really unique and interesting properties that a lot of big banks and a lot of other organizations are trying to tap. I mean, so much so that it's become a meme, it's become kind of a joke in some circles. But one of the things that I find really amusing about these hacks, if there's anything amusing about them at all, is that when this money is stolen as a result of the blockchain and the transparency that Joe talked about, you can actually see where the money is. It's like if somebody robbed your bank account and they're holding it in front of your face, but you don't know who they are. You can actually identify and track down all of these stolen Bitcoin and other digital currencies. You just don't know who's holding it. You don't know who's behind it. That's actually a feature of the blockchain and of the technology undergirding these digital currencies. That you can see it, you can revoke those coins, you can block them, you can freeze them. So there's actually a lot more transparency in that system, than the traditional banking system. And that's ultimately a good thing that lots of companies can put to use.
A feature or a bug, though? That is the question. Jordan Robertson of Bloomberg Tech, Bloomberg's Joe Weisenthal. Thank you both. All right, now to a story we are watching. Amazon is being urged to improve conditions for workers in China who make Echo speakers and Kindle e-readers. New York-based advocacy group China Labor Watch recently released a report painting a dismal picture of low pay and intense working conditions. This coming after a 9-month investigation at a Foxconn factory in the city of Hengyang. Amazon said it had already identified concerns and is addressing them. Coming up, net neutrality is expiring. Our conversation with FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr on what it means for the future of the internet and us all next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. Listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. The Obama-era rules, known as net neutrality, officially expired on Monday. Those regulations were designed to keep internet providers from slowing or favoring their own websites or programming, and were voted down by a 3-2 FCC party line vote late last year. Take a listen to what FCC Chair Ajit Pai had to say as the rules rolled back.
The internet wasn't broken in 2015. These rules were a solution in search of a problem. I strongly believe in a free and open internet. Our rules will ensure that the free and open internet remains and that Americans will have access to better, faster, and cheaper broadband.
Now, advocates of net neutrality are pointing to the Senate's recent measure to block the FCC from rolling back the rules, but that might be a slim hope because that bill isn't expected to pass the House. For more on what comes next, I want to welcome FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr back to the program. Commissioner Carr, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, you've seen the public commentary. There are a lot of people opposed to this, think this makes the internet less open, less free. What is to stop broadband providers from AT&T and Comcast from favoring their own content?
Thanks, and you're right. Americans are passionate about the free and open internet, and there's a lot of concern about what the repeal of the Obama-era rules means for consumers. To your point, they want to know, can Comcast start blocking me? Can they start throttling? Do they have new freedoms to charge me more? And the answer to all of that is no. Is that starting today, by repealing this 2015 Title II approach, Comcast continues to be subject to rules that are going to stop them from engaging in that conduct.
So, talk to us a little bit about how you really expect smaller providers to compete here. I mean, the argument is that they will be more competitive, more innovative, but it seems like it could have the opposite effect.
Yeah, here in D.C. on the coast, we talk a lot about AT&T and Comcast and Verizon. And I've been lucky to spend a lot of time outside of D.C., and there are thousands of literally mom-and-pop broadband providers. What they don't have is the army of regulatory lawyers that AT&T and Verizon and Comcast do. For them in particular, the cost of having to work through this Title II regime that we applied for the first time in 2015 was driving up their costs. So what we're trying to do is lower the regulatory costs of getting into this business, of competing with those big providers. And what we were seeing is that Title II was a big piece of added costs that was making it harder for those smaller providers to compete with the Comcasts of the world.
What happens if the courts overturn this?
So this is on appeal right now, and I'm pretty confident where we stand as a legal matter. The Supreme Court has already looked at this question: is internet regulation a Title II or a Title I service? And they agreed with the FCC the last time around that this is a Title I, can be classified as a Title I information service. So that's the path forward in terms of the litigation.
House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi tweeted, "Today marks the repeal of net neutrality protections. As the Trump FCC's rule change takes effect, you deserve better than this. The House must act to save these protections. Hashtag save the internet." Congress, as I mentioned, is considering a measure to nullify this vote. Should that pass, what should Congress do?
So the vote that's currently taking place in Congress that went through the Senate a week or two ago is about restoring that 1930s era Title II regulatory regime that we talked about. That's very different than a standalone bill that would enshrine some pretty common rules of the road. Look, there's really not a lot of disagreement out there about what should the basic rules be. No blocking, no discrimination, no throttling based on content. And there's legislative paths forward that would enshrine those common sense rules into law. The bill that passed the Senate, unfortunately, is focused on putting back that Title II regulatory regime. I don't think that's the right approach, but I'm more than open to legislation on a standalone basis that would put those basic rules of the road and put this entire issue to the side going forward.
Now, with respect to AT&T and Time Warner, on a slightly different subject, versus the DOJ, where do you stand on the issue of distribution?
So this is not a transaction that came before the commission, so I'll eagerly await the ruling of the judge, which I believe is expected tomorrow, just like a lot of other Americans.
And what about these Cambridge Analytica and ensuing data scandals with respect to Facebook? There is, some potential that they violated an FTC consent decree. Is this something that you're following?
Yes, and so I think what all of that underscores is how passionately Americans care about online privacy and data security. And I think that's one reason as well that it's a good thing that today is the effective date for moving from Title II back to Title I. Because what that does is it gives authority back to the Federal Trade Commission, which is our nation's premier consumer protection agency, and now they can look across the internet ecosystem. So if it's your internet provider that has your data, or if it's Facebook or Cambridge Analytica, now we have an agency, the FTC, that can look at that whole operation and decide what's in the best interest of consumers. Under Title II, the Federal Trade Commission was divested of authority, data protection and otherwise, for consumers with respect to their internet providers.
Now, Chairman Pai made you the point person on the FCC's 5G wireless infrastructure initiative. You know, there's a lot of concern from local jurisdictions about their authority being gutted. What are next steps on 5G?
Yeah, so we did an order in March that cuts about 30% of the total cost of deploying what are called these new small cells. That's going to be about 80% of the 5G deployment. And to your point, I was just up in Boston on Friday at the annual U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting, and I met with a large group of mayors from around the country. And there's actually a lot of common ground here, too. They have important, long-standing role to play with respect to zoning and approvals of these new deployments. And I'm looking to find ways that we can work together. If there's outlier conduct, fees that are, making it difficult to deploy, particularly diverting capital from places that need deployments, we're looking at that and some other common sense guardrails. But the state and local officials are always going to be our partners. They're always going to have a role to play as we look at these 5G deployments.
The U.S. was the first in the adoption of 4G, but there's a concern the U.S. will be behind when it comes to 5G, when it comes to China, when it comes to South Korea. What are your thoughts on a single nationwide 5G network?
Yeah, so there is a global race that's underway to be first in 5G. And why does that matter? On the one hand, it's going to take $275 billion in private sector investment to get 5G across the finish line here in the U.S. The country that moves quickly, that's where that capital is going to flow. So we want to be first so we get the investment necessary to see 5G and so that our consumers here can benefit first. Our path forward, I think, is the same one we used for 4G, which is to incentivize private sector investment and to incentivize competition among multiple private sector companies in terms of the deployment and the provision of service. That's our game plan that worked to lead the world in 4G. And my view is that's the path forward for 5G as well.
FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Coming up, Kitty Hawk, the flying car startup backed by Google founder Larry Page, has a new aircraft taking to the skies. We will show you next. And later in the hour, our conversation with London Mayor Sadiq Khan at the launch of London Tech Week. His thoughts on a new study that calls London the AI capital of Europe. This is Bloomberg. Not too long ago, flying cars were considered far-fetched technology seen only in movies and television shows like The Jetsons. But some major players in tech are making flying cars a reality, not just for a few, but potentially for all of us. Our Bloomberg Tech senior executive editor Brad Stone takes a closer look at Kitty Hawk's latest innovation.
No, it's not a scene from The Fifth Element or Star Wars. Flying cars, they're suddenly very real. German company eVolo has a flying car with room for two. Airbus is developing a single-person autonomous flight vehicle. Chinese drone company eHang is attempting to get its taxi flight drone in the air as soon as federal regulations will allow it. It can fly over 11,000 feet. And Uber predicts urban air taxis will be roaming the skies in 10 years and has even partnered with NASA to develop new traffic concepts and skyports.
We make big, bold bets. That's part of the identity of the company.
The company's vision for the network, dubbed Uber Air, would let customers push a button and get high-speed flight in and around cities. And another flying car company just announced its latest aircraft. The Kitty Hawk Flyer, funded by Google co-founder Larry Page, sports 10 battery-powered propellers and 2 control sticks and looks like something out of Star Wars. At first, it'll go 20 miles per hour and fly up to 10 feet in the air, all without the need for a pilot's license.
We computerize the system so that every person can learn how to fly in 5 minutes.
No word yet on when the Flyer will go on sale or how much it will cost. Kitty Hawk is also working on another aircraft called Cora. All in all, at least a dozen companies around the world are pursuing the sci-fi dream of personal aircraft to help you avoid congested highways. But are we in need of a reality check? To put flying cars in the sky, we'll need a new automated air traffic control system, years of safety tests, and cultural acceptance with the idea that these new vehicles could be landing right next door.
Our Bloomberg Tech Senior Executive Editor, Brad Stone, with me here now to talk about this. I'm not sure I'm quite ready to ride in one of those things, especially at 11,000 feet. But how big a leap in innovation is this new flyer from Kitty Hawk?
Well, I mean, look, it's cool. I would love to ride one. I think they've probably made some advancements in lightweight materials and battery technology. It's essentially a drone you put a person on top of, but they only fly over water, and you can only go 10 feet in the air. This is a recreational vehicle. I kind of compared it to the water jetpack. So it's not monumental in the way some of these other vehicles are.
Talk to us about the vision here. I mean, isn't it about relieving traffic congestion, going short distances?
Totally. So that's why the Flyer is sort of a one-off. You know, Kitty Hawk has another car called the Cora, which is really a flying car, an air taxi. Lots of other companies, Airbus, Joby Aviation, are also working on basically the idea that you hover over traffic instead of sitting in it.
We saw a bit of your interview with Dara Khosrowshahi a few weeks ago. Is this something that Uber can really be competitive, or that will change the market for Uber, or is this just flashy PR?
It's almost the least impactful thing they're working on right now. When you think of things that can move their bottom line, Uber Eats or new geographies, you know, Uber Elevate is an idea. They're not building a vehicle. They're trying to bring the industry together. Jeff Holden, who is running the effort, just left Uber. So I think it's probably going to be companies like Kitty Hawk or Airbus or Joby Aviation that are actually really making a difference here.
Now, some of the flying car aficionados say that flying cars will be here faster than self-driving cars. Give us the reality check on that.
Yeah, I don't believe it. I mean, Emily, we can look out the window here at Pier 3 and see, you know, autonomous test cars passing us on the Embarcadero. You know, Tesla has vehicles out there with autopilot. That's level 3 autonomy. You know, the FAA has got to take a deep, probably decade-long look at some of these vehicles. So the idea of these personalized transportation vehicles flying through the air is going to take a long time.
So talk to us about where regulation stands now.
I mean, it stands nowhere. Like Dan Elwell, the acting administrator of the FAA, went to Uber Elevate and said, we're going to come at this from a safety perspective. It takes 10 years for them to authorize a new aircraft. There are things about like the air traffic control system and what kind of airspace you will use that have yet to be figured out. So I think we're at the very beginning of what will be an impactful transportation revolution, but it's going to take a long time.
Maybe someday. Maybe at 1,000 feet. Thank you. Bye, Brad Stone, Bloomberg Tech. Appreciate it. Okay, coming up, as Xiaomi prepares for its IPO, we're going to head to Hong Kong to take a closer look at its business. Can the company keep up with global competition and expand beyond China? And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology, and be sure to follow our global breaking news network at TikTok, on Twitter. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. The anticipation is building for one of the biggest tech IPOs in Asia in years. Xiaomi revealed it lost more than $1 billion in the first 3 months of 2018 as the Chinese smartphone maker prepares to persuade investors to buy into its IPO. Bloomberg's North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel has this report from Hong Kong.
It's one of the most highly anticipated Hong Kong initial public offerings in years and could be the world's biggest since Alibaba listed in the U.S. in 2014. Now, Beijing-based smartphone upstart Xiaomi is said to have won Hong Kong Stock Exchange approval for its expected roughly $10 billion IPO, which also would be the first here under new rules allowing weighted voting rights. Now, it also may become the first company to issue Chinese depository receipts. We're hearing up to 30% of this IPO could be in the form of mainland CDRs, as the Chinese government has been encouraging its large tech companies to list back at home. Now, estimates for the valuation of the 8-year-old Xiaomi have fluctuated everywhere from $30 billion to more than $100 billion, in part because of mixed signals of the direction of the company. 70% of revenue comes from selling smartphones, but co-founder Lei Jun insists that Xiaomi's real goal is to be an internet services company, making money off ads and online games. Stephen Engel, Bloomberg News, Hong Kong.
Here to discuss Xiaomi and where things stand in the global smartphone market, we're joined by Brian Reith, the Program Vice President for IDC's Mobile Device Tracker, and our very own Bloomberg Tech's Mark Gurman, who covers consumer devices. So, Ryan, I want to start with you. First of all, these new numbers about the bottom line and the lack of profit. How concerning is that?
Well, I think when you're heading into IPO and you lose $1 billion in the first quarter, really of full public exposure, that's a concern. I think the bigger concern now, when I look at this, is that I think they've said 60% of Xiaomi earnings right now is still coming from hardware, right? But they're trying to be more of an internet play. So I think the biggest challenge is really, if you're an investor, is can they make that transition from hardware, which is not an easy thing to do, right? They're not the only person that's out there trying to do this today.
So let's talk about the broader smartphone market, Mark, and how Xiaomi fits into it, given the juggernaut Samsung, Apple, and so on.
Right, so if you look at the top 5, Apple, Samsung, Xiaomi, Huawei, and others, Xiaomi, I believe, is number 4, and they have about 8%, 8.5% of the market, and they're shipping about half the units in the first quarter of 2018 of Apple. And you know how many units Apple sells, so that's a big number. They sold about, I believe, 25, 26 million in Q1, according to IDC data. So that's pretty good, especially for an IPO set of numbers. But the big question that looms over this whole thing is the U.S.-China trade war, what's going on there. You see how much ZTE and Huawei have been affected. We reported last year, and I believe this is actually what sparked everything, that Xiaomi, along with Huawei, were trying to get into the U.S. this year. It's sounding like now, because of all of this and the Trump administration, that's not going to happen. And potential investors in the IPO have to decide if near-term U.S. penetration is important to them or not. And so we'll have to see closer to the IPO how much investors care about that.
I do have another chart here in my GTV library which shows the breakdown of shipments in the first quarter of this year, where Xiaomi actually comes in at number 5. Ryan, what are you seeing when it comes to trends? What do consumers want? What do they not want? How quickly are they upgrading, et cetera? Yeah, so developed markets are certainly, the life cycles are extending. I don't think we've seen huge changes in terms of shifts in price bands, right? Developed markets, it's probably a 60-70% premium, which is usually Apple and Samsung, or Apple and Huawei, depending on the market. And then really it's just this low-end play. That hasn't shifted completely. So I think when you look at Xiaomi specifically, they've transitioned a lot of their business model to go from China, which is a very different market, for the last 5 years, where subsidies were included, high growth, which has all changed now, really to focus on India and other markets where subsidies don't exist. They've got to focus on not just online play, but retail in-store, as well as marketing. So there's a lot of shifts there, and I think Xiaomi's playing into some of these markets very well in terms of brand positioning and talking about sort of their ecosystem. But it also concerns me that some of the build-out where they're heading into markets like Western Europe, with some of their Mi Home stores and so forth, at what I would consider a very fast pace. So it'll be interesting to see if those actually stick and have traction with the consumers. So Mark, Xiaomi has been upscaling its brand. Can they really compete upscale?
In China, I think especially they can compete, and that's the market, that's their bread and butter right now. And I think another direction they can take, and they're starting to do this already, is offering a more premium-looking device, a device with a more set of integrated services in sort of some of these developing markets, parts of Asia, as well as India and the Middle East, and sort of make a big push there, because we see Apple's really not playing in that space thus far successfully. They're trying, that's where they're going to go long term. But I think for the next 3 to 5 years, Xiaomi has a lot of ground that it can get ahead of in front of Apple in those areas.
What are the broader trends you see, Ryan? I mean, I know you've identified a few catalysts that could actually boost smartphone demand overall over the next couple of years. Right. Yeah, so there's a few others. So I guess when you look at the vast majority of the install base, which is essentially users that have bought a phone that's probably under $300, we're actually starting to see these consumers get more
tech savvy, if you will, right? So they're moving up slightly in terms of, their buying price bands, if you will.
But not as often,
Not
right?
as often, and they're not significant jumps. This isn't $300 to $700, right? So it sort of keeps Apple and to some extent Samsung outside of that picture. But I think it's showing consumers are doing more on these devices, so they're expecting more. Some of that's in terms of processing. Most people have pain points with batteries. These things all start to add up, and collectively, people start to say, next time I go to purchase a phone, I might need something better than I purchased next time.
Mark, what do you think is going to make or break this Xiaomi IPO?
It's going to make or break the Xiaomi IPO. I think it's going to be how well they can compete, like you said, against the big players in Asia, Apple and Samsung. They have to decide, do they want to be a formidable competitor in terms of the services and the offerings and I guess the niceness of the devices from those big players, or do they want to be the alternative that comes in at several $100s US cheaper, that comes in with mass market features that people really care about? You can see Apple's not prioritizing battery life as much as their new services and features. It's a balance. Maybe Xiaomi should not strike a balance and just go fully toward tilt on something like battery life.
And you have new reporting on what Apple and Samsung have coming up later this year that is going to be the competition. What do you see?
Yeah, they're just going to go higher and higher end. There's going to be the Note 9 being announced, we're told, on August 9th, and we're going to have the new iPhone around early September, larger phone, less expensive model. And that less expensive LCD model, it's basically a cheaper iPhone 10, that's still going to be in the $600 to $700 range, which is still going to come in way on top of Xiaomi. So I don't think that's going to be a big problem, but maybe a little one.
Ryan, given some of Mark's reporting, do you see anything that could disrupt the hierarchy as we know it, or do you see the market share chart looking the same over the next year?
I think in terms of the players at the top and the premium, I don't see any short-term disruption. I would call short-term 3 to 5 years. I do think that there's a good chance that these top 3 players, Samsung, Apple, and Huawei, could continue to lose share at the account of companies like Xiaomi and Oppo and Vivo gaining. Right? That's a trend that we've seen for at least 3 years now. But I guess with regards to Xiaomi specifically, if this is a successful IPO, if I could add my 2 cents, I think it has to go beyond hardware. So I think they need to sell this story of an ecosystem, whether that's with their partner devices and platforms or whatever it may be. But I think that's what calls this a successful IPO.
Right, and they've been trying to sell that story,
Yeah.
but will investors believe it? Okay, Ryan Reith of IDC, Mark Gurman at Bloomberg Tech. Thank you both. Okay, Microsoft's Xbox is looking to ramp up video game competition with Sony's PlayStation and Nintendo. Xbox previewed dozens of new games and deals with studios at the E3 conference in LA. Xbox has lost ground to industry leader Sony in the current round of video game consoles. And Wednesday, we will be on the ground broadcasting from the E3 conference, talking to Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick and Nintendo's Reggie Fils-Aimé, among others. You don't want to miss it. Coming up, our conversation with London Mayor Sadiq Khan at the launch of London Tech Week. What he has to say about the new leadership at Uber next. And the building blocks of life. Did NASA discover them on Mars? We will get the answer straight from their head scientist next. This is Bloomberg. It is a big week in the City of London as Tech Week is underway, bringing together some of the biggest names in coding, artificial intelligence, and venture capital. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde joins us now from London with more on what we can expect. Caroline?
Emily, it's a big week. 55,000 people descending right here on the UK capital to discuss, well, the success of the ecosystem, the record investment, the IPOs around the corner, but also what else is needed to ensure London doesn't go losing its place as the top European tech hub to rivals like Paris and Berlin. I spoke with the city's mayor, Sadiq Khan, at the launch event of Tech Week. Take a listen.
This is Europe's biggest festival of tech and innovation. And it's amazing. We'll have a week of more than 200 events. There are more than 50,000 visitors coming to London Tech Week from around the world. And there's so much energy and excitement. The great thing about London Tech Week, it gets bigger and bigger each year. Yeah. And you've got from startups to those thinking about startup to those accelerating to the multinationals to investors, entrepreneurs, innovators, researchers, all in one place. And so it's a very exciting ecosystem, and this is the future. Look, we can't run away from AI, automation, tech. Why? Because A, it's out there, but B, it'd be foolish to do so. I think we're going through a fourth industrial revolution, and I want to surf the wave. I want us to make the most of the tech sector, not just because of business, but because it improves our quality of life. I want to see how can tech be used to improve public services? How can tech be used to create jobs that are sustainable in the future? And we've made a great start this morning.
You talk about riding that wave. Interestingly, we're still seeing record VC money coming into London in terms of technology. We are seeing it continuing to grow, but there's slight competition out there. Notably, there's a report saying, look, now Paris is the #1 destination to put your money, so say 450 global investors. Are you worried about that London's been knocked off of the #1 spot?
Well, we must never be complacent, and I'm not complacent. But actually, there is lots of good news as well. What are the good news? A recent report in relation to AI showed, as far as AI companies are concerned, there are more in London than Paris and Berlin combined. Not that I'm competitive. So we are the AI capital of Europe. Also, we've seen in relation to tech investment, venture capitalist investment, still going up post-Brexit. So look at Apple, Google, Snapchat, Amazon, Facebook, continue to invest in London. But actually, I think Paris and Berlin raising their game is good for us. I see them more as working in collaboration with Paris and Berlin rather than as competitors. I think it's really good that we have this synergy where if you're a smart web designer in London, you're a startup in London, you now want to have a partner in Paris or Berlin. Even more important post-Brexit, I think the future is a future of cities working closer together, mayors working closer together, and peoples working closer together rather than national governments, bureaucratic, slow, cumbersome. So I welcome Paris and Berlin raising their game. It bodes well for London.
What about the regulatory environment here in London? What about welcoming companies such as Uber? We know that the license still being ongoing under discussion. Do you think that we're still as welcoming to tech companies, and how does that conversation continue?
I want London to be a place where you want to come if you're a tech startup, if you're in disruptive technology, if you're an innovator. I want you to come whether you're a multinational or whether you're by yourself with a friend. But here's the rules. The rules are everyone plays by them. The rules of the game, regulation must apply to everyone, whether you're Uber or whether you're with a partner starting up a startup. And it's really important that I support Transport for London when it comes to them as the regulator saying to somebody like Uber, listen, you're not playing by the rules of the game. I don't care how many lawyers you've got. I don't care how big your lobby arm is. Play by the rules of the game. Good news? The new global CEO has heeded that message. And if you look at these sounds coming from Uber, look at the changes they've made. They're respecting the rules we have, but also in the end, everyone benefits. The consumer benefits, a better service, no corners cut. Uber and other tech companies should benefit because they are doing the socially responsible thing as well. That will hopefully lead to more profits being made. But I benefit as well because I want tech companies coming to London. I want disruptive technology. I want tech companies to be helping me provide better public services. It's cheaper, but also it's a 21st century solution to problems we've had for many decades.
Do you think that we are seeing companies growing with the ethics that you want to see in London? I know that you're someone who's very much focused upon diversity within the world of technology. Are companies getting that message?
What's remarkable is actually the values these companies have are really positive and progressive, but no one's engaged with them. So if you don't engage with them, they'll do it their own way, and they'll see their competitor cutting corners, and so will they. And I've engaged over the last 2 years with many of these CEOs, innovators, startups. They want to do the right thing. They want to pay a London living wage. They want to make sure that when it comes to the tech talent pipeline, they're going into deprived communities. They're making sure there are more women involved in these sectors. And the good news is young people and women want to enter these sectors. And so the reason why I'm excited about the tech sector for London is I think actually they're going to help make sure that parts of our city that haven't enjoyed the fruits of growth will enjoy the fruits of growth, because actually, with the right training and mentoring and support, anybody can do it. So I want young people to learn coding. Google are doing some great stuff around coding for girls. I want to see campuses that are sustainable and environmentally friendly. So all the evidence I've had from my conversations and my dialogue with tech startups is they've got the right values. They love London. I was looking at some research recently in relation to AI companies. The number of founders who are either ethnically diverse or women was remarkable, which shows they've got the values, they've got the ethos, they need a helping hand. My job as the mayor is to give them the helping hand.
passionate and optimistic London Mayor Sadiq Khan there, Emily.
All right, Caroline Hyde for us in London. Thank you for that conversation. BYOM. Bring your own marshmallows, and Elon Musk will supply the flames to roast them in the form of a flamethrower. Hundreds of people lined up outside his Boring Company headquarters to get their hands on the $500 flamethrowers that the company sold to raise $10 million in funds. The, well, flame-off took place next to SpaceX headquarters and also showed off a Falcon 9 rocket and prototype Hyperloop tunnel. Coming up, NASA's Curiosity rover may have its most significant discovery yet on the red planet. What it means for finding life on Mars next. This is Bloomberg.
Is there life on Mars?
Well, finally, there may be an answer to David Bowie's timeless question, or at least a better chance to narrow down the answer. NASA's Mars Curiosity rover has found what could be the potential foundation for life on the red planet. Organic molecules have been found on Mars's 3.5 billion-year-old bedrock. What does it mean for the chances of finding life there? According to NASA, those chances, quote, just went up. To tell us more about this exciting news, I want to bring in Jennifer Eigenbrode, a biogeochemist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center and the lead author of the study on these findings. So, Jennifer, is this the best evidence yet that life may have existed on Mars?
Yes, I think it is. And essentially, we found organic matter in rocks from an ancient lake on Mars. That lake was around 3.5 billion years ago. So the planet was a lot different back then. And we've had other clues that tell us that pretty much their water was around, there were nutrients around, and there was energy sources around. And now we have evidence of organic material around. So essentially, everything that life would need to be happy was there. We just don't know if there was life. The organic materials that we found could be from life, or perhaps they were just possible food for life back then when the lake was around. Either way, it still bodes well for the search for life going forward.
So let's take it one step further. Is it possible that some form of life still exists there? Does this give you any information about that?
Well, we're not really sure if life has ever existed, but if life ever got established, it was probably really early on in Mars history, around the same time that life got established on early Earth. At that point, the two planets were probably very similar. And Mars sort of took a different path. It lost its magnetic field, the atmosphere started getting swept away, and a lot of radiation started hitting the surface, and it changed the planet significantly. And thus, Earth kind of took a different path. It developed a really diverse biosphere, and Mars, if it ever had life, probably lost a lot of its biosphere. Now there are some scientists who think that life would have taken refuge in the subsurface if it ever existed, and it still may be there today. But there are other scientists who think that essentially the Mars biosphere is burnt out.
So the Curiosity rover has been taking samples from Mars for 5 years now, and I know that this new information gives you new details on where and how to look. But what's next now that you know this?
Well, the next step is to actually look for the biosignatures. These are basically imprints from life. You can imagine a dinosaur leaving a fossil behind in form of a skeleton. Well, microorganisms can leave behind chemical imprints of their existence, possibly even cell structures. And those are the types of things that we would look for in the ancient rocks as indicators of whether or not life used to exist on Mars at some point. And there's two missions that are in the works right now that can shed light on this. The first one is from the European Space Agency, and it's the ExoMars rover that will launch in 2020. And it has the capability of drilling down 2 meters, which is a really important technology development, because that means that they can get away from the radiation. They have the potential of getting to organic materials that are much better preserved than what Curiosity encountered in the top 5 centimeters. The other mission is one by NASA. It's called the Mars 2020 rover, and if it stumbles upon the right material, it can cache it And at some point later, the plan is to come back and pick it up and bring those samples back to Earth for further analysis. And both of those could actually tell us a lot more about whether life ever existed on Mars and the potential for life to exist there today.
And NASA is looking for life in the solar system outside of Mars. If it is somewhere else, what's most likely?
Oh, it's anybody's guess. There's Mars subsurface, which is a good place to look for more recent life. There's the ancient rocks to look for the ancient life. On other places, two really appealing places are ocean worlds. We call them Enceladus, which is a small moon that goes around Saturn, and the other one is Europa. Both of them have oceans underneath an icy crust. And it's possible that those oceans actually have something similar to what we imagine as the microbiology at hydrothermal vents in the oceans here on Earth. And if that's the case, then the ocean water could have signatures of life in it. Could be modern day cells, it could be old material, but things that would actually tell us if there had been life there. And if we can access that ocean material, then we can do a pretty good search for life. And if that's the case, then it might be a life that evolved independent of Earth's, which would be pretty fascinating for, I think, everyone in general, but certainly the science community.
A fascinating discovery indeed. Thank you for bringing it to us. NASA's Jennifer Eigenbroeg, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. That is all for now. I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.